And our guest is here with us this evening. His name is Alan Mendenhall. Let me get him on the line. Alan, you there?
Yes, I'm here, Jennifer.
This has been the strangest day for me, Alan, and I apologize. I've never had too many technical problems, and I'm convinced that I'm being targeted today. And it's very likely because we're talking about this topic, because you know what? Liberals hate the discussion of a constitutional convention, but you know what? We're going to talk about it anyway.
Well, that sounds good.
All right. Well, Alan Mendenhall is our guest this evening. He's a staff attorney to Chief Justice Roy Moore of the Supreme Court in Alabama. He's also the author of The Literature and Liberty and a managing editor for the Southern Literary Review. Alan is an adjunct professor at Faulkner University. He's also worked with the Cato Institute and is a member of the Philadelphia Society and president of the Montgomery chapter of the Federalist Society. Alan, welcome to Conservative Nation Media.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
I'm glad you could be with us. So, well, and I don't know if you got to hear some of our topic there at the beginning of the show, but we were making fun of CNN and their theory about Flight 370. And they, yesterday on CNN, I'm sure you probably heard this, but it always makes for good comedy. They think there's a possibility that the plane flew through a black hole and could actually be in another dimension. So I was going to ask you your comments on that.
I'm not sure I have a comment on that. I did hear that, and it conjures up associations with the show Lost, which my wife was a big fan of. But I'm not sure I have any comment on the black hole theory.
Yeah, it's out there. It's out there, but that's why we love it, and that's why we mention it. So, anyway. But getting into your article, Alan, let's talk about your article in the American Spectator. Now, the title of your article is, let's call a constitutional convention already, Article 5, a gift from the founders. So why don't you tell us about your article there, Alan?
Sure. Well, I'll start with the title. The title was actually selected by the editors. I did not choose the title. And I actually prefer not to use the term constitutional convention, even though it appears in the first
Shame on them. Okay, we're calling them out right now. And you know what? I'm going to say that because I don't work for the American Spectator. You should listen to Alan, whoever you are. Okay, I'm just teasing, but go ahead.
The term constitutional convention conjures up associations with the Philadelphia Convention of 1787. And there's this argument that a constitutional convention would essentially throw out the entire Constitution, and that we'd have to start over from scratch, and that this process would be co-opted by people on the left and by the federal Congress. But there's really no evidence for that, and there are so many checks that Article 5 has built into it that just doesn't seem to be a realistic possibility. What Article 5 says is that the Constitution can be amended in two ways, either by two-thirds or supermajority of both the Senate and House of the federal Congress, or by an Article 5 convention of the states, which is, I prefer the term Article 5 convention or convention of the states or a term such as that. But this would be assembled at the application of the legislatures of at least two-thirds of the states, or 34 states, and then any proposed amendment at the convention would have to be ratified by 38 states in order to take effect. And this mechanism, the Article 5, is meant to bypass the federal Congress. It's meant to give the states the power to amend the Constitution when the federal government has become oppressive, and in fact, even Hamilton acknowledged that Article 5 was a mechanism for the states to challenge federal power.
Right. And I'm all about states' rights. That's one of my favorite topics. You're speaking my language here. Now, let me ask, so how many states, now I just saw this come up, and I don't want to give it away because I'm going to let you answer it. How many states have recently been in talks about the Constitutional Convention?
Well, gosh, I mean, a lot of it talks about it for a long time. We've had over 400 applications since 1789, but for various reasons, various purposes, some of those applications have been rescinded. Georgia is the most recent one that I know of to actually fill out this formal application to Congress. It's called Senate Resolution 736, and it recently passed the Georgia House as well. So it is sort of the model for people who want to call for this constitutional convention for the limited purpose of restricting the powers of the federal government and the jurisdiction of the federal government and limiting the terms of office for federal officials. So it is right now, in my opinion, the model application that if we got that magic number 34, if we could get 34 states to follow suit, we would be able to assemble this convention and have it be limited to the sole purpose of minimizing federal power.
Right. And I did see, in fact, I'm a big fan of Twitter. I'm out on Twitter all the time. And I just maybe it was about 2 weeks ago, was tweeting that out that Georgia did pass and this about a constitutional convention. And it's exciting because what we're starting to see is states are finally saying, enough of you, federal government. We're sick and tired of this, all this trampling on our rights. And just like we were talking about in the first 15 minutes about voting rights, you know, what's happened time and again, we've seen the federal government under the Department of Justice with Eric Holder at the helm come in and dictate to states, oh, no, you people, I know you voted on that, but you can't have voter ID. We need cartoon characters and dead people voting, or else we can't get our people in there. So, you know, I said that. I know you didn't. But, you know, but that's the thing. You know, the founding fathers meant for us to be, you know, governed on a local level, state level, and then a federal level. And what we have today is exactly the opposite.
Well, and it's really interesting if you look at the history of how Article 5 was passed originally, and there was a provision that provided for the Constitution to be amended without the assent of the federal Congress. And Alexander Hamilton, who was sort of the big centralizer, among other delegates, thought that Congress needs to have the power to amend too. They're the federal government. We need to give them that power. And Madison, and keep in mind this is before Madison became more of a Jeffersonian, but he proposed language that gave the federal Congress the power to amend. And then George Mason and some of the other states' rights figures were furious and thought that this would lead to federal tyranny. So Gouverneur Morris and Elbridge Gerry, they reintroduced language giving the states the power to bypass Congress and amend the Constitution, and that's what stuck. And so now we have a concurrent amendment power. So the federal government has its amendment power, and the states have their amendment power. And so there can be no doubt that this second option for how to amend the Constitution was meant to be a way to empower the states to bypass the federal Congress.
Yeah, and why is that idea so radical? And we may have to talk about that and let you answer that question when we come back. But tonight we are talking to Alan Mendenhall, who he is our guest this evening. He's a staff attorney to Chief Justice Roy Moore of the Supreme Court in Alabama. He's also the author of Literature and Liberty and the managing editor for the Southern Literary Review. Now, Alan is the adjunct professor at Faulkner University. He's also worked with the Cato Institute and is a member of the Philadelphia Society and president of the Montgomery chapter of the Federalist Society. And let's run to break real quick. I'm seeing some very strange things going on now, Alan, with my computer, so there's no doubt they don't want this message to get out. But we're going to keep going, and we're going to persevere despite all that. We will be back in just a few minutes, and then I'm going to get my co-host, Curtice Mang, in on this discussion as well. Stick around. We will be back in just a few minutes. If you are just joining us this evening, this is Graceland here on Conservative Nation Media, and please give us a call. I know we did have a caller right before the break, 302 area code. If you're still listening, please call back in. Our telephone number is 718-305-7176, and tonight we're talking to Alan Mendenhall. He's our guest this evening. He is a staff attorney to Chief Justice Roy Moore of the Supreme Court in Alabama. He's also the editor for the Southern Literary Review. He's an adjunct professor at Faulkner University, has worked with people like the Cato Institute, and is also the president of the Montgomery chapter of the Federalist Society. So we're glad that Alan could join us. Tonight we're talking about his article in the American Spectator, and I'm going to turn it over to my co-host, Curtice Mang. I'm sure he's got a couple of questions for you as well.
I do, and thank you, Jennifer. And Alan, it's very good to speak with you tonight.
Thanks, Curtice. It's nice to speak to you as well.
Now, I tend to take a probably a somewhat different approach than you might, in that I tend to take the be careful what you wish for you just might get it approach, and I'm generally fairly cautious, and I suppose that's one of the things that makes me a conservative. But you mentioned that some of the concerns of as you call it, an Article 5 convention would be that the entire Constitution would be scrapped and rewritten, start all over again. But wouldn't, in fact, an Article 5 convention essentially open up the entire Constitution? Not that it would be scrapped, but it does open all of it up to be tinkered with. Is that not correct?
It's not correct, because the applications are applied. The way the applications are aggregated is that they're aggregated by subject matter, so that once you get that magic number, that 34, you'd have to have 34 applications for that particular subject matter. Now, if you had 34 applications that said, we want to amend the entire Constitution, then that would be definitely cause for concern. But if you have 34 applications that are modeled off of Georgia's, then you would, you would be limited at the convention to the scope of minimizing that federal power. Now, there's some question about what happens if you reach that magic 34 number and the applications are slightly off. They're similar in subject matter, but not quite. And would some lawsuits arise if a convention were to be convened based on language that is similar but not identical? So there is that issue, which is why I think it's important for this movement, this Article 5 movement, to follow suit with someone like Georgia, who is taking the lead, and try to model the application off of there, so that the applications do come in almost, so they're looking almost identical. That way you guarantee that the scope is limited to those particular topics. But I understand the concern. I do understand that concern. One of my responses to that is, we've already allowed the federal government to far exceed its powers under the Constitution by doing nothing, by, just letting it happen. All the fears that people have about an Article 5 convention leading to a runaway convention is usually the term you hear. All those fears have already taken place without the convention. So, the way I see it, you have, 5 options basically. You can do nothing and just hope things get better. You could keep trying to vote in politicians, but that doesn't seem to be working, and there's nullification, secession, which, have not been very successful traditionally. Or you could use the mechanism the framers gave us through Article 5 and try to do it that way. And I always like to emphasize that Article 5 is constitutional. It's in the Constitution. It's part of the Constitution. It is something that the framers designed to allow us to check the power and erect barriers of the against the federal government.
And that's a very good point, and it's something that I think I've got to remind myself is that yes, in fact, it is part of the Constitution. So I think everyone would be wise to keep that in mind. Now, I've got another question, and that is, it takes 34 states, to pass convention measures, as you say in your article. Is there any time limit as far as when it would start? When the first state, Georgia, for example, would do theirs until you get to 34 states, or can it just go on indefinitely until you finally get to 34 states and say, okay, let's do this?
Theoretically, yes, it could go on indefinitely. There's no constitutional provision that says that an application becomes stale at a certain point. So because the Constitution is sort of silent on that, you have to assume that the application will just last until it's rescinded. And there have been several applications that have been rescinded over the years. And some states have rescinded by just simply saying, we rescind all applications that we've ever filed for an Article 5 convention, just to make sure that sort of clears the entire board. So, yeah, in theory, it does. The applications would be open until they've been officially rescinded.
That's very interesting. Very interesting. Okay.
Well, and Alan, I know, and I don't know, it might be, you may have another question, Curtice, but I know going back to your article in the American Spectator, I wanted you to kind of talk about, and then I'll turn it back to you, Curtice, some of the things that you mentioned about Mark Levin's book, The Liberty Amendments. Everybody's just going nuts over this book right now. What are some of the things that would be brought up? And because I think that is so important, because this is so much of the stuff, the meat of what the problem is that's going on in our government. What are some of the things that would come up, you think?
Well, Levin proposes 10 amendments, and I'm trying to recall them off the top of my head. It's establishing term limits for members of Congress. He'd like to repeal the 17th Amendment so that senators are we revert back to where senators are chosen by the state legislatures rather than by direct election. Term limits for Supreme Court justices and legislative override of their opinions. Protecting the vote, such as so that it's guaranteed that it's only going to citizens. Promoting free enterprise by limiting powers under the Commerce Clause. These are some that are coming to mind. I'm not sure I can recall all 10 just offhand, but limits on taxing and spending is another big one I can think of too. Now that we've got a debt that figures vary, but we're talking possibly $17 trillion in debt.
I know,
so
it's crazy.
These are all proposed amendments that would be, according to Levin, that could be talked about at the convention, considered. And remember, there's always the check at the convention. You still have to have 38 states ratify. So if we call this convention, we get together, we talk about revising the Constitution, and we've got a couple states that are going rogue, and some delegates or commissioners, as some people want to call them, are not acting the way that in a way that makes other states comfortable. Well, you still have to ratify any proposed amendment, and you've got to have 38 states rather than just 34 to ratify. So, that's a high bar, and you'd really have to get the chances of passing anything that weren't limited to just a few amendments are slim.
Gotcha. Well, and I'm going to turn it back to Curtice because I know he had another question also.
I was curious about the prospect of legislative override of Supreme Court decisions, and that to me, while I can certainly argue, as I think most of us can, against some really horrendous Supreme Court decisions, but it seems a bit challenging, I think, to have legislative override of Supreme Court decisions, because doesn't that then kind of get into a circular format where the legislature overrides the decision, then that override goes back to the Supreme Court and so on? Is that a possibility?
I think that is a possibility, and I think it's one of his more controversial proposed amendments. Again, it would require. I think he has a supermajority that would be required to do that. But yes, I mean I see that being a potential problem with that particular amendment.
Very good. Thank you.
Well, and Alan, I like what's being proposed here. We all would love to see things like term limits and private enterprise, coming back into the marketplace and things like this. But realistically, how successful do you think this could possibly be? I mean, we're basically talking about, you said that 38 states have to ratify an amendment now, but 34 states have to participate in this convention, right?
Well, 34 states have to apply for it, at which point the convention has to be called, and then all 50 states would be participating in the convention. But you have to get to 34 in order for the convention to be called. And you raise a really good question. That's a lot of, that's a lot. There are a lot of states there to reach that threshold and that minimum. But if you think about it this way, in 2008 there were 29 red states, 21 blue states. 2012 election, I'm speaking presidential election here, there are 23 red states, 27 blue states. Doesn't sound so good for us, but I mentioned offhand, by the way, that Americans are fleeing the blue states for the red states right now because the red states have so much more income growth. But at any rate, if you don't think about it federally, you don't think about those federal officials in the federal elections, such as the presidential election, and you look at the state legislatures, which are the groups that would be calling for this convention, 27 of those are Republican. So you get 27 there. Then in another 6 states, Republicans control at least one house. If you can win those over, then you get 33. You're one short of that 34. Then you've got some states like West Virginia that are conservative. They're in their state legislature, they're nominally Democrats, but they're much more conservative than even some of the red states. So if you start throwing those states in, that puts you up over the 34 tally, and you're getting somewhere close to that 38 mark. And at that point, you kind of just have to catch a state or two and be lucky. But this is not completely outside the realm of possibility.
No, and what I'll say with what's happening right now with Obamacare burdening states, just saw articles in the last few days talking about how premiums are about to skyrocket, and I think there is already a revolt from Democrats and from liberalism. People are starting to understand, oh, wait a minute, I get it. And so what you mentioned just there, if you look at things on a federal level, it appears like, and it does seem like we as a nation are becoming more liberal, more blue. But if you take it back to the state legislatures, actually the exact opposite is happening. So you see this polarizing effect. On the federal level, it appears like, we are becoming more liberal. On a state and local level, we're becoming more conservative. Do you agree?
I do agree, and I actually think, although the young vote, Obama carried the young vote, young people are going to be burdened by this debt that's being piled on top of them, that they're going to have to dig their way out. And when it becomes evident that only free enterprise and capitalism can create the kind of growth that can even begin to start paying that down, and that can even begin to start expanding the economy and growing jobs, then it will be, you hope that the youth at least will come to their senses and realize, we need economic freedom and economic liberty and free markets and prosperity. We're tired of being jobless. We're tired of being stuck at home in our parents' basements. We want to get out. We want to make money.
Yeah, pajama boy. Who
Exactly.
wants to spend their life as pajama boy? Now, Curtice might. I don't know. Curtice really likes that little getup. I know you do, Curtice.
Yeah, I've got 3 of them in my closet right now.
He's in one right now. Too bad. We need to get our webcam going. Well, guys, we need to That is funny. We need to run to break real quick, and then we'll come back. We're going to wrap this up with Alan Mendenhall about his article in the American Spectator. Please stay with us. We will be back in just a few minutes. Well, we are back. I am your host, Jennifer Meadows, here with author Curtice Mang. This is Graceland, our debut show, and evidently the DHS, the CIA, the FBI, and a whole lot of other folks, they don't want this show to come to you. So for sure, you need to share this show with your friends. Tonight we're talking about the Constitutional Convention that was provided by our founding fathers. Gosh, what a radical idea. We're finding out not so radical, really, but we do appreciate you listening to Graceland this evening here on Conservative Nation Media. Now, it looks like we do have a caller, Alan, so let's see. He's probably wanting to talk to you, so let's see what he's wanting to what his question is. This is in a 719 area code. You have called the Graceland here on Conservative Nation Media. What's your question or comment? Hello, 719? Well, it was a stalker. It must have been DHS. I don't know. They just disappeared. So, but anyway, what we were talking about, I completely agree with what you were saying right before the break, and what you're seeing is young people are basically in a revolt. They're not going to the Republican Party or the Democrat Party. You're seeing millennials going to the Libertarian Party. And so I think solutions like this may have, a real life in the very near future.
I agree, and young people like to be excited about something. They like to have a reason to rally behind something, rally behind a cause. Rand Paul has been extremely intelligent in tapping into this aspect of the youth psychology. And I say this as somebody who is fairly young, depending on whose standards you're going by. But he got a standing ovation, for example, at Berkeley.
I saw that. That's crazy
stuff.
That's crazy stuff at Berkeley, of all places. Wow.
Yeah, and I think that people they get fed up with issues like NSA spying, IRS targeting certain groups because of their beliefs. All these executive orders with Obamacare is just one after the other. The national debt. I mean, these sorts of issues really hit home for a lot of young people.
I agree with you, and I think this is a time when you really are starting to see states all over. I love the 10th Amendment Center, and we did have them on our show. It's been not too long ago, and they were talking to us about all the things that are happening with nullification across the country. This is an idea that is certainly catching on across the country, and let me tell you, when you see the radical agenda that's coming out of Washington, whether you're talking about the NSA or Common Core or Obamacare, states, I just fully believe the American people at the end of the day, they're not going to stand for this. And so I think this could very likely be a very good possibility somewhere in the near future, maybe not this year, maybe not next year, but somewhere in the near future, very likely could be.
Well, and it has a lot of support, at least rhetorically. I mean, Glenn Beck, Sean Hannity, Mark Levin, Rush Limbaugh, they've all come out to support this idea. Senators Mike Lee and Rand Paul have both expressed their favor. So, it's catching on. It's picking up momentum. There are a few people that are really behind the push. Mark Meckler with Citizens for Self-Government, and Rob Nadelson is a former law professor, and Michael P. Ferris. He was chancellor at Patrick Henry College. I'm not sure, he may still be, but he also founded the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. So you've got a lot of big names pushing this. And, you mentioned nullification a minute ago. A lot of people say, well, why do you need an Article 5 convention? You could try nullification instead. Well, I don't see these two remedies as mutually exclusive. I mean, I don't see why you couldn't try both.
Right. Well, and as radical as things are becoming, we might need both. I mean, who knows? And I think as we continue to see this agenda out of Washington becoming crazier and crazier. You know, Mr. I've got a pen, I've got a phone, I don't care what you think, America. The more we see this, I'm telling you, I think states are going to get on board with this kind of thing, and specifically Obamacare. I think that's going to be our ace in the hole because states are going to be burdened with this at the end of the day, and I just don't see it working. And I know we've seen just in the last few days there have been several people on a national level, pundits, political pundits and whatnot, that are saying that Obamacare is probably on its deathbed, and we certainly hope so. And, Alan, I would love to continue this discussion, but we are out of time, so please tell our listeners where they can follow you and also your articles as well.
Well, thanks very much. I have a website that's just AlanMendenhall.com, ALLENMendenhall.com, and I post almost everything I write up there, and I've got links to my book, Literature and Liberty, there as well.
All right. Well, Alan, I tell you, this has been a really enlightening discussion because I'll be honest with you, didn't totally understand the Constitutional Convention. So you certainly have educated me this evening, so I appreciate you coming on the show.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you. You take care.
Thanks, you too. Bye-bye.